Hi everyone, my name is Ashley Thompson and my presentation today is titled Feuds in Funding Black Education. In this video, I will identify some parallels in two sources concerning the overall theme of funding black education. It is my hope that after this presentation you will be able to recognize some of the systemically racist factors in the funding of black education throughout history, as well as how some of these factors are unfortunately still present in today's society as well. This presentation will take a look into the issue centralized around black education funding in James D. Anderson's book, The Education of Blacks in the South from 1860 to 1935, as well as an article by Dr. Sabina Elena Vaught titled The Color of Money, School Funding and the Commodification of Black Children. Dr. Sabina Elena Vaught is an associate professor as well as the interim chair of the education department at Tufts University. Dr. Vaught also serves as the director of the Women's Gender and Sexuality program at Tufts University. Dr. Vaught's article, The Color of Money, gives a look into the role of racism and how it shaped the funding policy of an urban school district in the U.S. Now we'll take a brief look into Dr. Vaught's motivation behind her research. Dr. Vaught noticed that the Jericho Public School System, or JPS, has a noticeable difference in the demographics of the students and faculty. 60% of the students in JPS are students of color, and 80% of the JPS faculty is white. Dr. Vaught also looked into the funding system in place for the Jericho Public School System, known as DSF, or Differential Student Funding. DSF provides largely impoverished neighborhoods with disproportionate federal funds dedicated towards its students. However, there is little policy, protocol, or accountability concerning how DSF funds are allocated in the Jericho Public School System. Considering that the student population is comprised mostly of students of color and that the faculty is majority white, the fact that there is little protocol for funding raises obvious concerns. Although Dr. Vaught's article discusses a specific urban school district, there are still parallels that can be drawn between her article and James D. Anderson's book concerning the funding of black education. The first parallel I will draw between these two sources deals with the way in which white people in positions of power within the education system perpetuate the hierarchy of a white-dominant society by their personal views of education funding. The second parallel I will draw has to do with the funding and support of the Accelerated Student Placement Program at Jericho Public Schools, and how similar this is to the Talented 10th presented in Anderson's book. As we look into the first parallel concerning the views of white authority figures in education on the funding of black education, the largest similarity that I see is selfishness. Anderson's book talks about how the rich northern philanthropists and southern planters mostly supported industrial and vocational training for blacks, and they would not even put much thought into the idea of funding anything beyond that. This was largely because they felt as though their social status would be threatened by educated blacks. In Dr. Vaught's study, it is mentioned that DSF funds that were supposed to be utilized by school administrators to allocate towards impoverished students were viewed as a burden by the school administrators themselves. Dr. Vaught describes this as inanely throwing dollars at children, but there was almost no accountability towards how that money was spent. The primarily white administrators appeared to hold the view that these funds do not affect themselves directly, so they didn't have much of a drive concerning proper allocation of those funds. Both Vaught and Anderson shed light on the selfish viewpoints of the white authoritative figures in this respect. The next parallel we will take a look into deals heavily with the financial allocations towards gifted students. Anderson's book discusses W.E.B. Du Bois' idea of the talented 10th, which he explains as his belief that the majority of financial resources should be dedicated towards the education and training of the top 10% of the black population. Although it's good to ensure that resources are available to gifted students, it shifts the focus away from the fact that all students have potential and should be given opportunities to learn and grow. In Vaught's study, it was expressed that a portion of DSF funds were dedicated towards the Accelerated Student Placement Program that benefited primarily white students. Dr. Vaught sums it up in a quote where she states, "So, the fact of racial power meant that although the DSF could float exclusive, advanced programs enjoyed only by white children, it could not, and did not, fund the students it was purportedly designed to support." In both Anderson's book and Vaught's study, it is clear that a large portion of black children are being excluded from receiving funding. Additionally, it appears that most of the funding that does go towards black students is allocated to the portion of the population that is deemed as gifted. This excludes a huge portion of the black population in schools. I think we can all safely agree that it's pretty disheartening to see some of the funding, or should I say lack of funding, patterns in black education today as there were over a century ago. It is unfortunately also noticeable that some of the root causes as to why this funding system at Jericho Public Schools is set up the way it is has many commonalities with the origin of funding decisions back in the late 19th century. So why haven't things changed? And how can we improve? I believe that it starts simply by recognizing one's own privilege and becoming allies and advocates. It seems as though the members of the JPS school board, as well as the administrators in those schools, are not cognizant of their own privileges, especially since they are allocating DFS funds towards gifted education, which goes mostly towards classrooms composed of white, middle, or upper-class students. These authoritative figures, in addition to recognizing their own privileges, need to undergo proper training about how to properly allocate DFS funds. Sensitivity training would benefit them as well. The bottom line is that we need to do better to provide resources for these underrepresented students. These are just the first steps. These are my sources.